unbelievably glorious carolling that they do in the morning. It goes on and on and on, but it's deeply and complexly structured. So the people that have studied these things are absolutely astounded at just how predictable it is.
For the weary traveller, the sound of the magpie calling through the dawn light after a long flight from the other side of the world is perhaps the most Australian of welcome homes. And for the wary walker, the sound of the wind whizzing past the stiff, angry feathers of the magpie, plus the snap of that beak, are often enough to make even the most confident of adults retract their head into their shoulders and scurry along like a chastised Maltese terrier. Who are these singing assassins who we both love and hate and fear, and perhaps we just don't quite understand? Anne Jones with you on RN, and this is Off Track, the program which explores Australia's great outdoors with a new place and a new discovery every week. The bird that makes this sound is sizable. It can reach up to about 35 centimetres in length, maybe more, and it has strident plumage, black, with large splashes of white. It's very handsome. It's got a square tail, a powerful beak, which is used for probing deep beneath the soil to pick out the juicy invertebrates. It has 3 large claws that point forward and 1 claw that points backwards, and those claws are on the end of very purposeful legs. Australian magpies occur almost everywhere in Australia. They're a fixed part of our landscape, it seems, and they're definitely a part of the soundscape of the ideal Australian morning. We name companies, sports teams after them, and we come to expect them to be right there in our backyards, standing regally on the edge of our balconies, and singing like some sort of demented keyboard, as one very unkind British friend of mine once told me. They have so many different tones. Apparently they can sing over the breadth of 4 octaves, and it seems they have so many different messages to sing about. You know when you might be near a maggie, maybe a younger bird, and you can hear it singing to itself, sort of, under its breath? I've always had the impression that that little singing to yourself ritual that some maggies do is sort of like a cat's purring, like a pleasant feeling of music vibrating through that bird's body. Cracticus tibican. That's its scientific name, where tibican means a whistler. And indeed, the magpie is a songbird, as explained here by Daryl Jones. No relation of mine, but he is also a doctor, and he's Deputy Director of the Environmental Futures Centre at Griffith University. He's been researching magpies for a long time now.
Some people claim that it's actually got the most complex call of any bird. So that unbelievably glorious carolling that they do in the mornings, especially during the breeding season, goes on and on and on, but it's deeply and complexly structured. So each morning, it might sound just like a whole lot of warbling and weird noises to us, but it really means we have no idea what it actually means to other magpies, but there's conveying a huge amount of information there. We can put it down to as simply as, this is my territory, bugger off, but it's probably a little bit more to it than that.
I think it sounds like sort of jazz noodling. It's just magnificent. But I heard you say the word there, carolling. What does that actually mean? Because you don't necessarily hear that used in conjunction with other birds.
Yeah, no, carolling is used pretty much exclusively for the specific kind of long calling, long complex going on and on type calling that magpies do. See, very few other birds do anything like that. There's the usual territorial calls, which just about every other bird does in the world, but magpies are a bit unusual. No, they're very unusual, let me say. They are territorial every single day of every single year. I mean, all the time. They never give up being territorial, which means that they're just protecting and patrolling and making sure that no other magpies come into their spot. Most other birds that are territorial only do it during the breeding season, and then they defend their patch. But magpies do it all the time, every single day. They keep every other magpie out all the time.
The song, the carolling and singing can't just be territorial though, because sometimes when you're walking along and there'll be a little Maggie sitting in a tree and he'll just be quietly singing just to himself, just really quietly. So there must be other reasons that they do this.
Oh yes, no, absolutely. But that's not the carolling. We were specifically talking about the carolling. The carolling is the morning call. It's the morning song. It's the I'm waking up now. I'm proclaiming my ownership of this patch, and you keep away, and you can do your same in your own patch over there. But they are. I mean, you mentioned, asked whether they're songbirds. They are absolutely songbirds. They communicate continuously with their song and vocalisations all day, and they have a huge number of a variety of calls. And so you hear them just mumbling away to themselves, humming a tune in their heads, and then making all sorts of noises all during the day. And we honestly have no idea what any of those things mean. But it's communication between the pair. The male and female stay together all the time. There might be offspring who are still hanging around, or members of a group. Sometimes magpies form large groups, and there's a lot of communication goes on between them. So that's why they're always saying something to each other.
Is it a learned song, as in, do they pass it down from parent to child, the form of each song?
Yes, that's almost certain. It hasn't been studied specifically in magpies, but it's been studied in all kinds of other songbirds, and that seems to be the case. So nobody's actually done the horrible experiment that they've done on other animals, where you take a baby, whatever it is, in this case a magpie, take it away from its parents and then it grows up alone without hearing any other magpies, and then seeing what sort of calls it would have. So by research that's been done on other species, what you would think would happen, very likely, is that they would have some kind of a call, but it would be much simplified and much less extravagant than what a normal magpie that can listen to its own parents singing. So yes, it's almost certainly there's a template there that says, I'm a magpie, I know how to sing, but all the nuances, all the different fiddly bits that go on, they would have learned from their parents or other magpies that are nearby. And don't forget, they're listening to each other. They're not only singers, they're listeners as well, so they can hear all this communication with other magpies who are nearby. And because they're so territorial, they can sing it at each other from a couple of metres apart on the boundary. And they do. They often vigorously combat with noise rather than having a fight, which is probably a sensible way to go.
Wow, it's like a rap battle. That's amazing. So,
absolutely.
Now, we might be able to imagine a crow with its beautiful black feathers looking like a shadow in amongst the trees. Magpies are really starkly black and white, often strikingly so. And I often look at them, especially when they're out, hunting across grass, a beautiful green, and they stand out like a sore thumb. So isn't it dangerous to have such beautiful markings?
Oh, it's probably dangerous, but their world is totally about, as we've already mentioned, the territoriality thing. It's all about being seen. They actually want you themselves to be seen very visibly by other members of its own species. And what you can sometimes see, and note this, listeners and yourself, Anne, that next time a magpie comes swooping towards you, inevitable in Australia at some stage, when they're coming towards you, they also put out a white feathers on their wings so that it's even more striking. They actually purposefully put out more black and white on their wings so that you can see them coming even more vigorously, more visually. So that's not a surprise. That's not a mistake. That's not just an evolutionary byproduct. It's intended to make them really conspicuous. That stark black and white.
So before we move on to the territoriality and the idea of keeping a territory, I really have to ask about their intelligence, because it seems to be obvious that they take a very keen interest in the happenings around them. They seem to make eye contact with various other beings, including humans, and really investigate new things in their environment.
Absolutely correct. That's a very good observation. They live now. You said we will talk about territoriality in a minute, but we can't avoid it because something that defines magpies, and it's already been mentioned, against other birds is that they have this territory that they live within permanently. They don't move out of it at all. So once a male and female have settled down in a patch, and that's they call it their patch, and they defend that patch, they seriously don't leave that patch for the rest of their lives. And that doesn't have to be very big. It might be just, a couple of hectares, or even less in the city where there's plenty of resources and food and all the other things that they need to survive and breed. So they live in a tiny patch. Now, if that tiny patch includes people, as it does in every suburb in every part of Australia, they know, and this is no exaggeration, they know all the people that live there. They know all the people, all the individual humans that live in their patch. They mightn't just know them as passing strangers. They might have absolutely nothing to do with them. But sometimes those people feed them. Sometimes those people attack them. Sometimes those people ride their bikes vigorously through their territory. Those magpies know all those individuals, and we've proven that. We've even shown just recently that, just like crows, which has been shown in America, but we've just shown that magpies can recognise individuals, and they do so by their facial features. And we've done some experiments where we've put different masks on different people, and they are responding to their faces. So just like humans, the magpies are recognising one another and us by our facial features. So yes, very clever, very attentive to their surroundings.
On RN, you're listening to Off Track, and I'm Anne Jones. Today, Daryl Jones is with me from Griffith University, and he's been studying magpies, among many other things, for well over a decade. The Australian magpie is a black and white bird, and it's regularly seen in almost all areas of Australia, and it has a characterful walk. They'll walk to get out of the way of a car speeding along a road towards them. And have you ever seen a magpie hop? They don't really hop, not like a raven does, where they hippity-hop along, and the raven walks as if it's got a stiff leg waddle that's sort of led from the hips. They swing their legs out, and the magpie has nothing like that. It's a graceful walker. It's bipedal, much like a plover or a wader. It is close to the earth, and it's able to listen and watch for the signs of the prey that's lurking beneath the grass. They'll run, but only in short bursts, wings akimbo, beak slightly ajar, and really, they're just a joy to observe. It's so interesting that, say, as far as what we might think of iconic Australian bird species go, say kookaburras or wedgies or emus, we might see them around, but what we're actually seeing when we're seeing magpies in our day-to-day life is exactly the same individuals every single day.
Yes, absolutely. No question about it. So those magpies don't move, they stay together. So if you think, oh, that might be the magpie I saw yesterday and you live there, that's absolutely correct. Those magpies will not have moved. And in fact, we know plenty of situations, these magpies live for sometimes 20 years at least. So it can be the same magpies that you saw as a child and now you're a bit older, or your kids were raised with those magpies. It's probably the same magpies. Eventually they will breed and eventually they die, but and the youngsters always get kicked out of home eventually at some stage, but the current pair, the sort of founding mum and dad, will stay together. As long as they stay together, they stay in the same patch.
Has European settlement actually benefited this species in providing it with oodles of lawn? Magpies
love people. That's a strange thing to say when at some stage we're going to talk about the fact that they actually attack us. But there is no question at all that there are many, many more magpies in Australia now as a result of all the changes that we've brought to the environment here. So we've taken away the forests, we've cleared the forests, but we've replaced sparse, kind of lean, crappy grass with rich lawns which harbour all sorts of grubs and worms and all sorts of invertebrates that magpies love to eat. Now, they make a living by just walking along the ground, looking and, very importantly, listening for the noises, very subtle noises that grubs or worms make under the ground. I'm not joking. They can hear that. That's why you'll see them put one ear to the side and then move their other ear to the other side, and they're actually centralising where the whatever it is, the grub or the worm is underneath the ground, and then they plunge their beak in, and next thing you know, that they've pulled out a struggling worm. So they listen for their lunch, And we have made magpie heaven with our suburbs. We like a sparse array of trees, not a forest. We like lots of grass, which we fertilise and mow and lawn and water continuously. And all that is perfect for magpies. Just a sparse number of trees that they can see through their territories. They can put a nest in them and have a good vantage point, and just endless amounts of food available in the grass. So yes, we've done. They really love the fact that we've actually turned the bush into suburbs.
You've mentioned that, I suppose, the ideal type relationship is a pairing of a male and a female who live in a territory for essentially their whole existence once it's established. But do they all breed? Does every magpie make it to that lofty ideal of actually finding a partner and settling down?
It sounds really suburban, doesn't it? And you know, we've made suburbs, and our humans have lived in them in our nuclear families, and so have the magpies. It's quite extraordinary. But no, you're right. I mean, it's tough out there. It's really tough. If you've got found a territory, and it provides all that you need, you'll fight for that, tooth and limb, to make sure no one actually moves in upon your site. So they're tough. The real estate in the city is hard to find. So all those young magpies which are raised, they find themselves suddenly, when they're booted out of home unceremoniously at the end of the season typically, they've got a really big problem, because they've got back-to-back endless territories owned by other pairs of magpies stretching to the far horizon. They're in big strife. So they've got to do two things: move right the outside until they can find a vacant patch, and if it's vacant, it's pretty bad, sort of substandard stuff anyway, or they just stay in a group, which we call a tribe, and they don't find a mate, although that's where they eventually will potentially find a mate. But basically, homeless teenagers that have just been kicked out of home hang around in these tribes, just large groups. There can be up to sometimes 50 unpaired magpies who are just hanging around, and sometimes they will just go into places like schoolyards or just sometimes they can, by weight of numbers, actually take over a territory or live within a territory that is owned by another pair. And just because there's a whole bunch of these young hoodlum magpies hanging around, they often select places where there's somebody feeding the magpies. And I should say, lots and lots of people feed magpies. They put out meat and cheese and all sorts of things for magpies. They are the favourite bird in Australia to feed. And so if you're a lucky enough magpie, you've just been booted out of home, you've switched onto a gang, which is the tribe, and that tribe might be based on some lady who's putting out kilograms of mince every day. That will be a temporary place for you to make a living, at least to stay alive. But eventually, every magpie needs to find a partner and find a territory. And eventually you'll probably have to move away from that patch and find your own spot. And it may be, right out in the boondocks, somewhere where it's hard to make a living.
But is it potentially possible that there's whole sections of the magpie population that indeed never reach that ideal relationship?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, it's a dangerous world to be in that place. That they are usually in places where other magpies have chosen not to live. Must be good reasons for that. Not enough food, not enough resources, perhaps dangerous, maybe beside a big busy road or a place where there's too many predators. There would be reasons for that. So, it's a tricky. Having just moved out of home, like humans, it's a tough world, and to make a living is really difficult. And to find a partner and find a territory, it's a risky business, and certainly not all of them make it. They just simply don't. The risk of eaten by a predator or run over by a car or taken by a cat is just so much higher unless you've got a nice territory.
And this gives us valuable information in terms of how we may seek to manage magpies and what people term their aggressive swooping. So what is actually going on when you get swooped by a maggie?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's something that we've been looking at for years now. So just to summarise, a decade's work, basically almost all the swooping occurs when there's chicks in the nest. Only when there's chicks in the nest. So not before, not while there's eggs, not while they're building a nest, and not critically when the chicks have left the nest. They spend ages, months and months with their parents having left the nest as fledglings, and they hang around with mum and dad for a long time. Only time that swooping occurs, and this is the standard typical September, October period of time, which everybody remembers as magpie season, that's when the chicks are in the nest. So why would that be the case? Well, we think it's entirely about brood defence. It's about typically the male, whose job it is to keep predators away from his precious chicks. He's simply trying to keep away what he has regarded, or the individuals that attack people at least, keep these dangerous humans away from his precious chicks. And it's only during that period of time. So we've already mentioned the word territoriality. Territoriality is only about keeping other members of the same species away from your patch. So the swooping of magpies is nothing to do with territoriality. It's actually all about brood defence. It's about protecting the chicks. Territoriality is what they do when they swoop at another magpie to keep it away. When they swoop at a human, they're not trying to keep us out of their territory. They're just trying to keep us away from the tiny little patch that surrounds the nest. And so it's the area of the attack zone, as I call it, that people get swooped in is just the immediate surroundings for the nest, not the whole territory. If it was the whole territory, there'd be nowhere safe you could possibly go.
So why is it then that you can essentially walk underneath some magpie nests, and not get a swooping attack, but in others you're a goner?
Exactly. This is crucially important because lots of people think as soon as the clock ticks over to the 1st of September or some time like that, suddenly the world is a dangerous place because every magpie will start attacking you. Absolutely. Thank goodness it's only between 8 and 10% of all the magpies anywhere, only a tiny fraction of them actually attack people. The complete majority, 90% of magpies during the breeding season don't even look sideways at people. They don't recognise people as threats. They don't have any problems whatsoever. Only this small fraction, and of course the small fraction, it gets all the attention, and as they should, because they do serious damage. They take eyes out, they injure people, they cause people to fall off their bikes. They cause a lot of dramas. But it's very important to realise that it's only a tiny fraction of the magpies out there that are attacking us during the breeding season. It's just as well because there are so many magpies that I pretty much think that Australia wouldn't be habitable if every magpie attacked us.
But the context of the life cycle and the behaviours of the magpie really put this short period of potential swooping into perspective, in that the magpie has spent potentially years securing itself a spot, finding a potential mate, bonding with that mate, and perhaps, if they're lucky enough, getting eggs through to actually hatching stage without them being predated. And so if at that one moment we disrupt that cycle and take away that magpie in a management technique to avoid what we think is aggressive behaviours, where essentially we could be disrupting a decade's work for that one magpie.
Oh, that's a really important point. So what you've immediately jumped on is what happens in lots of cases in terms of management of magpies. But I really have to tell you that every year between 5 and 10 eyes are lost, that people are seriously injured. So it's it's actually a wildlife management conflict that we do need to take seriously. I understand the magpie story completely from an evolutionary perspective. They're only doing what they're supposed to do. They're just being, protecting their chicks. But there is plenty of times when we really do need to do something. So what that typical something is to grab the bad magpie, typically the male, and take it away. Now what standardly happens now is we catch the magpie and we take it on a long drive and we let it go in the bush somewhere where it's potentially could make a living for itself. So the really huge question that you've raised is, well, what happens? This is a mate for life species that has, against all the odds, found a great place to live, a great mate to raise their children with, and suddenly humans have intervened and taken away half the equation. And I should also say that magpies are really unusual among lots of birds in that the male and female absolutely share 50-50 the duties of raising the chicks. So if you take away half that equation and there's still 4 starving chicks in the nest, what on earth will happen? Now, this is precisely what we've studied in a great lot of detail, because in lots of species, and probably most infamously among African lions, if an African lion is replaced by a younger male, or he gets shot or gets killed or something like that, and a new male takes over the pride of lions, the very first thing that happens, totally natural, absolutely tragic, absolutely appalling, is that the new male will just kill all the cubs because they're not related to him. They're not his offspring. He's going to have absolutely nothing to do with raising them. He's not going to waste his genes on those. So he kills the kids. So I found myself in the situation of being the manager, the person that was actually taking away, disrupting this very stable social arrangement between these two magpies, and thinking, oh my goodness, am I actually going to contribute to, basically infanticide? Well, the good news is, no, it doesn't happen. What is absolutely extraordinary, and I've just described their social arrangements, they are mate for life. They find a partner early in their lives when they're in the tribe. They go off together, they find a patch, and they stay together until one of them dies. Or, in this case, is removed by a nasty human. Well, what happens is the male, who was mated for life with the female, is replaced typically within a few hours. A new male has shown up and said, I've heard that you need a new mate. What do you need me to do? I'm ready to go, and I will take advantage of this opportunity. And so she, extraordinary for us, she accepts him instantly. Well, she probably has to out of absolute desperation. She's got starving kids, but more importantly, she's got a territory to defend. And she says, in a sense, and I'm being totally anthropomorphic here, as I tell people that you really shouldn't be, she basically says to the new guy, I'm desperate, you'll do. Okay, out there, start patrolling and bringing food, and let's see how you go. And that's exactly what he does. So the new male, unrelated, goes against all evolutionary principles, unrelated to the chicks, starts feeding them at a higher rate than even their true father was doing. Now, all this was astounding stuff to us. The good news is, when we were taking away the male, in almost every case, certainly more than 80% of the cases where we took away the male, a new male came in and started being the parental male, and everything was happy, and they raised the chicks successfully. Extraordinary.
Absolutely extraordinary. And an example of how mate for life, which is a phrase that we hear quite a bit in bird species, might not actually be as clear-cut and dead-set romantic as we might think. Perhaps Maggies are just pragmatists. Or perhaps they're another unbelievably complex species that we really need to observe more to understand fully. I mean, it's been noted, for example, that the magpies partake in extra-pair copulations. That is, they have sex with other partners as well, even when they're in a stable relationship. So it's not as if pairing for life and keeping the home territory warm is all as clean and tidy as it sounds. I really think that with magpies it could be the case that our familiarity with the species, the fact that we see them around all the time, leaves us with this idea that we have a deep understanding of their behaviours, and really that's not the case. We have much to learn that's far beyond the idea of an ice cream bucket with eyes drawn on the back from our childhoods. Speaking of which, I'd love to hear your observation and stories about magpies, and I've put up Dr. Daryl Jones's own advice on how to avoid swoops over at the website abc.net.au/rn/offtrack. And you can also find me, Anne Jones, on Twitter and Instagram. I would love to see some of your photos of magpies, so get clicking away between now and the next episode of Off Track on RN. That's when I'll take you somewhere else.